Welcome to the PHP Essential Training Series. I'm Mike, your host, and in this tutorial we're going to talk about functions in PHP. This is part one of a two-part tutorial series. We're actually going to look at functions and how we use functions inside PHP. Functions are a very important part of any programming language. PHP is no exception to this rule. When we know that we'll be using sections of code over and over again in our application, that's a good indication that a function would be a good choice for that section of code. So what is a function? A function is used to make a task that may consist of many lines of code into a routine that can be called by using a single instruction. PHP contains many functions that perform a wide range of tasks that are actually built into the programming language. And you're going to see that as we go through this exercise. We're actually going to use a few of those built-in routines inside of PHP, as well as generate our own. There are many built-in functions in PHP. We'll look at a few of those in this exercise. We'll also define our own function as part of this exercise. The online manual for PHP, which is available at www.php.net, is a great resource for getting information on the PHP language and the functions that are built into PHP. In fact, I'm going to bring it up. I want you to actually see what I'm talking about. I actually have php.net loaded. One of the functions that we're going to look at in our exercise file when we get into this exercise is the built-in date function of PHP and how we can format dates by using the built-in date function. So what I've done is I've gone to php.net and I've actually typed date into the search field, and it's going to take me to the description of this function. And you'll notice it gives us a description of the function, what it expects, what it returns, and what's optional. And we'll talk a little bit more about this when we get in the exercise. And then it shows me all the different parameters that we can enter into for these string formats to actually set up the format of the date as it's returned to us. And you'll see me demonstrate this inside of our exercise. But what I'm going to do right now, I am going to drop into our development environment so we can demonstrate some functions inside of PHP. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and drop down out of our presentation and drop into our development environment. First thing I want to do is I want to go ahead and make sure I've got my Apache server up and running. Since we will be processing PHP, we're actually going to have that server up and running to process the code that we're going to write. So make certain that in your development environment you got your Apache server up and running. And then I'm going to go ahead and load up Google Chrome, which will be the browser I'm going to use for this particular exercise, and bring up my text editor, Sublime Text 2. You'll notice I got a very blank, generic HTML5 file with just functions in PHP. I've actually got that loaded into my local host. I'm going to bring it up inside my browser window. Nothing displayed because we actually don't have anything yet inside of our body elements for this particular exercise. So what I want to do is let's look at a built-in function of PHP. The first thing we're going to look at is let's look at the date function. So I'm going to come down here in the body because I actually want to be able to have it so you guys can have copies of all this if you have access to the exercise files. So I'm just going to say working with dates. And I'm going to close out that H1 tag. And I'm going to come right below that. I'm going to open up a small PHP block. So I'm going to have my less than sign, question mark, PHP. That I'm going to put in the space. And if you've been following along with me in the previous exercises on PHP, you'll notice that this is how we open up a PHP block of code inside an HTML document. The one key being here, though, remember we've got to save the HTML document .php with the .php extension in order for that PHP to be processed by our server, because this is all server-side scripting language. So then I'm going to type echo date. I'm going to open up a parentheses. I'm going to open up some quotation marks. I'm going to put a small j. I'm going to put a capital F, and I'm going to put a capital Y. And then right after that parentheses, I'm going to go ahead and put my semicolon to close out that PHP statement. Then I'm going to have my question mark, my greater than sign, to actually close out the PHP code that's part of that particular command. I'm going to go ahead and save all those changes inside this document. So what I've done, or what we've done, if you've been following along, we've actually told this document that I want to open up a PHP block. I want you to go find the date function inside PHP. And because I'm using the echo command, I want you to display the date inside my browser window. It's going to come right up underneath our heading. So if I save these changes and refresh our browser, you'll notice I've got working with dates. Oops, didn't want that greater than sign. Now let's go ahead and save that and refresh that once again. You'll notice I've got working with dates in my H1 heading, and then right below it, because I've got this PHP function that I've called the date function, I actually see 20 February 2015. And it's laid out based on the way that I've used these arguments inside the parentheses. If you remember when we talked about this a few minutes ago, we actually have arguments that we could put inside that function as to how we want it displayed. And you'll notice, let me go ahead and minimize this for a second. I'm using a small j, a capital F, and a capital Y. And if we look inside of our manual, let me go ahead and just minimize, make this a little bit smaller. That small j tells me day of the month without leading zeros. So it's actually looking for a day of the month. Let me see if I can get this minimized. So that's what we have right there. Day of the month without leading zeros. Then we've got, after the small j, we've got this capital F. So if we go back and look inside the manual for the capital F, we scroll down here and let's see that capital F says a full textual representation of the month, such as January or March. And you'll notice that's what we're getting there. A full textual representation of the month. And then the capital Y, which is what we're seeing as the final variable, or I'm sorry, the final argument inside our function, that capital Y, that tells PHP a full numeric representation of the year, so the 4-digit representation of the year. And that's exactly what we're seeing inside that function, as we call it. If we modify those arguments, in other words, if I were to take, let's go in between our quotation marks, and let's just put in a difference. And I'm going to put in a capital D, a small j, capital F, capital Y. Now some of these you should already be familiar with, because we've used the J, F, and Y from the previous exercise. Let's go ahead and save that change and refresh our browser. But now you see that capital D is bringing in the 3 textual day. So that capital D represents the day of the week that we're in with 3 characters. And again, it would tell us that if we go into the document and scroll up to the capital D, a textual representation of a day, 3 letters. And that's what we're seeing, and that's why we're seeing that D there. We could do this another way. I could change that D and let's make it a lowercase l. Save that, refresh our browser window. So now we're getting the full representation of the day. And again, just by changing the arguments that we're passing into the function, because keep in mind, this date is nothing but a built-in function inside of PHP. By changing the way we're dealing with the arguments, we're changing what we're displaying inside of our browser window. If I was actually going to do this for real, I would probably have that lowercase l, I'd put a hyphen, I'd put an uppercase F, lowercase j, and then an uppercase y. But after the F, I'm probably going to put a comma. I'm going to go ahead and save that change, refresh the browser window, and you'll see why I would probably do that. If I was using this in a real live environment, I'd probably have Friday with my hyphen, February 20th, 2015. February 20th, and actually my comma should be after the 20th, not after the February. Let's go ahead and pull that out. Save the change, refresh the browser, and that's probably how I would set that up if it was a real application that I was playing with. So keep in mind, I'm going to go ahead and bring up our php.net one more time because I want you to keep in mind every function has a prototype that defines how that function is set up. And this is the prototype inside that date function. You'll notice we're at date, and it tells us how it's set up. Understanding how to use the documentation is a big part of understanding a lot of the functionality inside PHP. Know that you can go to this php.net, and inside that search bar, type in the function that you're looking for, and there are hundreds of them inside PHP. In fact, you can see some of the ones that are listed along the side here, date time functions that we're looking at. We're only looking at the date, but there's a lot more that pertain just to that. But understanding how they work and how they return values and what you're expected to put in is a big part of PHP. Anything that's inside these square braces is optional. We could have actually had this return a timestamp with that date time format, or that date format, but I chose not to for this particular example. But that's another optional setting. We just put in the comma, and then we can actually get a timestamp back with it also. And you're going to see a little bit more about that when we generate the next function that we're going to build inside of our own function in the next portion of this exercise. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and minimize this window for our php.net for our documentation. In addition to all the built-in functions inside PHP, there are as many as you'll learn as we work through these exercises with the PHP Essential Series, because there are many built-in functions in PHP. We can also define our own functions, and that's what we tend to do a lot of as we're writing code. We actually tend to create a lot of our own functions as we're writing code so that we don't have to keep typing code over and over again. And it makes it easy to update our applications. If we want to change certain portions of the application and we're using functions, we can actually call that functions in many different places of the application, but only have to modify it one time to make the changes that we need for our application. So custom defined functions are a big part of any programming language. This allows you to define your code one time, and then merely by calling the function, you can execute the code. This makes maintaining and updating your code much, much easier. So let's look at a couple of simple examples of user-defined functions. I'm going to come up right underneath where we did our date. I'm just going to put in a couple of lines. Go ahead and do a save as. Let's go ahead and save this as exercise 2 so that we can keep the changes from exercise 1. And I'm just going to add a little bit of code to this. I'm going to add a couple of break tags so we get some line feeds in here. And I'm going to come right down below that. I'm going to put in an H2. Let's calculate a tax rate, because we all love to pay taxes. That was meant as a joke. Now let's go ahead and close out that H2. And right below there, I'm having a heck of a time spelling today. You may have detected my voice sounds different. I've been pretty sick. I've had a pretty bad cold the last couple of days, but I've got to get some stuff done, so we just have to keep pushing on, keep driving on. So I'm going to go ahead and open up a PHP block with my lesson sign, my question mark PHP. I'm going to come down a few lines and close out that PHP block. And this is where we're actually going to define our own function. So I'm going to put in a function, and I'm going to call it add tax. That's the name, that's the physical name of the function. And I'm going to pass it in an argument, and I'm going to call the argument amount. And then I'm going to open my curly braces, and I'm going to close the curly brace, and inside the function, I'm going to calculate a total, and that is going to be equal to amount times 1.59. And that's just what I happen to be using at this particular rate. And then right below that, I'm going to say return total. And what it's doing, it's telling the function that I want to return that value outside my function. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come right down below that. I'm going to create a variable. I'm going to call that variable price. And this is actually going to be the price of our item. And it's going to be equal to, in this particular example, let's just say 15. I'll make it equal to $15. And that with a semicolon. And I don't want to put a couple of echo statements in here because I actually want this, I want you to be able to see what we're doing with this particular function. So I'm going to say echo, and again, we know what echo does. It actually outputs to our browser window. And I'm just going to type, in fact, you know what I'm doing? I'm going to copy this from the exercise file so you don't have to watch me type it. So let's go ahead and copy that and paste this in, and then we'll talk about it. So I'm going to echo the price before the tax was, and then I'm going to pull the variable, pull the value of this price variable and display it. Then I'm going to come down right below that, and I'm going to echo another statement. And I'm going to put this right below the original echo, and this is the price after the tax. Then I'm just going to take another echo statement and bring that price in with the tax rate. So I'm going to echo the add tax. I'm calling this function, and I'm passing in the price. It's going to calculate what the value is, and then it's going to return that back to me. Because remember, we're returning the total, so I'm going to get to see what that price was after the tax. So let's go ahead and save these changes. Remember, we're in exercise 2 now. I'm going to go back and refresh my browser and bring up exercise 2. And hang on, let's go. Call the unidentified function add tax. That's because I had my function name. There we go. I don't need that underscore. Let's go ahead and save it, refresh the browser window. So you're seeing here that what we've done is we've called this function. First I created the function called add tax. And I'm passing in that function an argument. And that argument, I'm giving a name of a variable name as amount. Then what I'm doing is I'm taking a new variable inside my function, and keep in mind that the variable is scoped only internally in the function because it's declared inside that function. And I'm saying total, you're equal to the amount. So whatever value I pass in times 1.59. And then I want you to return this total. So remember, we're assigning the value of total here, where we take the amount times 5 plus, or times 1.59. We're assigning that value to this total variable. Then I'm returning the total variable outside the function. And that's where I'm getting this price. Because when I passed it in, it's actually passing it back out now as this amount here, this 23.85, because I've taken 15 and I've multiplied it by 1.59. So that's how you create a user-defined function. We're going to go through this again with a couple of more examples, but I just want you to see how we create a user-defined function and what we can do with those functions. So now, anytime I wanted to update this variable, let's say if I made the variable $22, save that update, it's going to update everything inside of my function because I'm calling the function here and I'm just passing it in this new value. So whatever that value happened to become, it's going to calculate it based on that new value. And I don't have to redo the function because basically I'm just taking that same code and I'm running it through this function and multiplying it by 1.59. You'll see in the next example where we can actually make this a little bit more dynamic by passing it in two values, because not only will I pass it in that amount, but I'm also going to pass it in the rate, the tax rate for the function to calculate. So now I can have two variables outside the function, calculate to, and you'll see that in the next demonstration. All right, so we're going to take this one step further. I'm going to go ahead and close out exercise _2 because I want to do another demonstration, and we're going to name this one exercise _3 so that you can keep these changes if you do have access to the exercise files. And what I want to do here is I want to pass a couple of different arguments into our function so we can, it's a little bit more true to life as to how we're actually going to be doing this in real life. So the first thing I'm going to do, let's go ahead and create my H2 tag. And I'm just going to say, let's calculate total cost using a function. And that's what the purpose of this function will be. It's going to be to calculate total cost. Let's go ahead and close out that H2. And then come down here. I'm going to put in I'm going to go right into our exercise file. I'm going to copy this out of the exercise file so you don't have to watch me type this, and then we'll talk about it. And I'm going to come right below the H2 heading, and I'm going to go ahead and paste this in place. And what we're doing is we're opening up a PHP block. I'm declaring two variables at the top of the block. One is called price, and I've got a price at $10.95, and then I've got another one called tax, which is going to be my tax rate, and that's 0.05. And then I'm creating a function called calculate cost, and I'm passing in the two variables, tax and price. It's going to take my sales tax is going to be equal to tax, and then it's going to return my price plus price times sales tax. So it's going to calculate the tax that's on that price, and it's going to add it to the value of price, and then it's going to return that to me. And then I'm going to come outside the function. My total cost is going to be calculate cost, so it's going to run the function and pass in the two variables. And then it's going to round that to 2 digits, and then it's going to print out for me in my browser what the value of that total cost variable is. I'm going to go ahead into the browser window. Let's go ahead and refresh and load up number 3, exercise 3. I'm going to go ahead and save all these changes, refresh our browser window. It says that we've got, I am missing a semicolon on, let's see, line 21. Go ahead and save the change, refresh the browser. So you can see that our total cost, by the way, if you didn't catch what the mistake was, I had a concatenation symbol between total cost and the semicolon. There was no need for that concatenation symbol since we're all inside PHP. So according to this, with a 5% tax rate and a $10.95 cost, my total cost would be $11.50 based on the values of the function. If I were to change these values, let's go ahead and make this $22.95. Save the change, refresh the browser window. This time my cost is $24.10. But I do have a couple problems with this. And it goes back to some more built-in functions inside of PHP. You'll notice that when I do my rounding, I'm rounding it to 2 digits, which is working fine here to this point, because I've got right now my tax is 0.05, so it's 5%. If I wanted to make it 5.1%, I put 0.051. And I could change my values of the actual cost by just changing that variable, saving those changes, refreshing my browser window. Everything seems to be working fine. I'm rounding. But one thing I do want to do is when I get a return that only has 1 digit here, because we actually saw some of those earlier, and I think I can get it back if I just take off that 1, refresh, get a single digit. I actually want that formatted so it always displays dollars and cents. So in other words, I'm always going to have 2 digits to the right of the decimal place. And we can do that by using another built-in function inside of PHP. So what I can do is when I'm actually doing this print cost, when I come down here and say concatenate total cost, I could actually put that into another function. But first thing, let's talk about this function itself. I want to make certain you understand that we're declaring 2 variables outside the function, price and tax. We're creating a user-defined function. This is a function that we've made up. It's not a function that's built into PHP, and it's called calculate cost. We're passing in 2 arguments, a tax rate and a price, and then it's figuring out sales tax based on the tax rate, and it's returning the price plus the price times the sales tax. So it's taking the price times the sales tax to get the total tax, it's adding that to the value of price, and then it's returning that to us as total cost. And we're getting that right here. The reason we're getting it returned as total cost is because when we're calling the function, we're actually calling the function assigned to a variable. So we're telling the function when you returned these 2 arguments, after you calculate and return this price, you're going to return it into the value of this variable, total cost. And that's where I'm getting that total cost from. And again, we can update the values of the variables. I can change either one of these values, save the changes, refresh the browser, and it's going to give us our calculation based on the function that we wrote. And that's why functions are so popular, because I can actually just manipulate the values of variables and just calling the function, because every time I run this code, I'm calling this function. So every time I'm refreshing the browser window, I'm calling the function with the values of the 2 new variables, I'm getting a new return. If I wanted this to be formatted so I always had 2 decimal points to the right of the decimal place, I could actually just type in another. I'm going to type in number_format. This is another built-in function inside PHP. And then inside parentheses, I'm going to put my return, comma, and how many decimal points I want. Since I want 2, I'm going to put comma 2. Number format is another built-in function inside of PHP. So if I save those changes, refresh my browser window, now I'll always get 2 points, 2 places to the right of the decimal point, regardless of what these values are. If I make this 599.95 and this is 5.12, save the changes, refresh my browser window, I'm always going to have 2 places to the right of the decimal point, because now I'm using a number format function inside of PHP to format that number before I display it on my screen. So I hope this gives you an idea of how we use functions, or a little bit better idea how we use functions inside PHP. I'm actually going to have a part 2 to the function tutorial. We're going to go through and look at a few more things that we do with functions where we don't have return values, but we might be looking for a return success or failure, or a Boolean return. And that'll be what we're going to cover in the next portion of the function tutorial.